I think that short-sighted people consider Ukraine a bottomless pit because they are unwilling to look at the danger that Russia's aggressive foreign policy poses to vital Western interests.
Okay. Um, that is a danger, as you say. The problem that the West is facing is there is another war in play in Israel and in Gaza. There's a cost of living crisis being felt in many areas, and they're having to look at their priorities, both domestically and also to other international areas as well. Um, remind us of the relevance of what we're dealing with here in Ukraine and in Russia, particularly at this time when it feels to many like it's reached a bit of a stalemate.
It's it's very simple. Putin is pursuing a revisionist foreign policy. He wants to restore Russian influence across the vast territory it controlled during the Soviet period. And were Putin to win his war on Ukraine, we would have to worry not just about Moscow asserting control over, say, Georgia and Moldova, but Moscow attempting to assert control over the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, and other countries that used to be part of the Warsaw Pact and are now part of NATO. So the smart place to make sure that Putin does not threaten our vital interests is in Ukraine. Because Ukrainians are fighting for their very existence as Ukrainians, and they face multiple ghastly war crimes. So they are fighting. All we need to do is provide them the assistance. And while the assistance seems large if you don't understand that Moscow is also coming for our core interests, it's tiny if we understand the threat Putin represents.
So you say there that Moscow is is coming for us, to be
Correct.
completely frank. Tell me
Correct.
more about that.
Look, um, if you listen to things that Putin and other senior Russian officials say, if you look at the at the supposed treaties he sent in December of 2021 to Washington and to Brussels for NATO, he talks about restoring Russian influence across the post-Soviet space, which includes NATO allies. So he's very clear about that. Beyond that, of course, we see his intervention in elections throughout the West. We saw his cyber attacks on the United States in 2021. We've seen his enabling Iran in the Middle East to enable Hezbollah and Hamas. So he is pursuing an aggressive foreign policy that cuts against clear American interests and
Mm.
Western interests. And again, if people understand that, the amount of money we're paying to Ukraine so they can fight the Russians and ultimately win is relatively small. Nothing compared to what we'd have to pay if Putin conquers Ukraine. We have to decrease our defense posture in Eastern Europe, for all NATO countries. And of course, if Putin were actually to start something with one of our NATO allies.
Look, let's get your reaction from, or rather, on Ukraine's response to this holding up of military support. Dmytro Kuleba, who is Ukraine's foreign minister, has said Europe does not know how to fight wars. He's been speaking to the Kyiv Independent. He said the production of weapons is not the most popular area of business. Unfortunately, our friends spent too much time deliberating on how and when to ramp up their production of weapons and ammunitions. And he said the superiority of Western donated arms will not be enough for Ukraine if they're not produced on a larger scale. That is a pretty stinging attack from someone there who appears, as we know, and understandably so, in desperate need of military aid. But are those the right words to be saying to 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 give the West a kick?
I think what he's saying has the virtue of being true. And I think the failure of the United States and our European allies to ramp up military production since Moscow's big invasion is a failure of policy, a failure of will. We know that if we wound up in a war, whether it were with Russia or China, we would need all the armaments which we are currently not building. So this is a mistake. Now maybe the tone of Kuleba's remarks could be modulated. Okay, that's fair. But what he's actually saying is true. And our politicians need to present to their publics the dangers of Putin's foreign policy, and behind Putin, Xi. Because if we let Putin win in Ukraine, the chances of Xi lashing out at Taiwan go way up.
Okay.
Something acknowledged by Taiwan as well as Japan
Yeah.
and South Korea.